In today's video, we're going to continue our 2019 NHL offseason plan series, and we're taking a look at the Boston Bruins, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So welcome back to the 2019 NHL offseason plan series. If you're new to this series, we break these videos down to 3 segments. Segment 1, we're going to take a look at the 18-19 season recap and analyze how the team did, take a look at some key team and individual player statistics. In segment 2, we're going to take a look at the salary cap situation and any pending contracts that need to be renewed this summer for RFAs or UFAs. And then thirdly, we're going to take a look at what moves this team should make to get back being as competitive or more competitive for next season. Also, if you're new to this series, I'm going to put a link up here in the YouTube cards for our full playlist of all the teams that have been covered so far in this series. There's only a few left, which will be covered here in the next few days. So check that out if you missed any of the other teams' videos so far in this series. Now let's jump in here with an 18-19 season recap for the Boston Bruins. Now, as we know, the Boston Bruins had a phenomenal year in the 18-19 season. They finished with a 49-24-9 record for 107 points, second place in the Atlantic Division, and of course just finished their playoff battle, losing in the Stanley Cup Finals in Game 7 to the St. Louis Blues. I'm sure that was a devastating loss for the Boston Bruins, but they had one heck of a series, one heck of a season, and they should hold their heads high here and be proud of what they accomplished. I know when you get to Game 7 in the finals, unfortunately one team has to go home disappointed and devastated, and this year that was the Bruins. But I'm sure they're anxious to get back at her here and see what they can accomplish next year. Now let's take a quick look at some of the key team statistics for this team throughout the year. Now looking first at special teams, they had a phenomenal power play all year, and that carried over into the playoffs. It was a huge part of their success. Their power play clicked at a 25.9% rate, which puts them in third place in the NHL. The penalty kill was about average, 79.9% for 16th best. Looking at goals for and against here, goals for were certainly pretty decent, 259 goals, 11th best in the NHL, and goals against were even better, only allowing 215 for 4th place. Now let's take a look at some of their key individual performances, including their goaltenders and top scorers. Here with the Bruins, Tuukka Rask again was the starting goalie, but really he platooned with Jaro Halak quite a bit. Halak performed quite strong as the backup goalie and ended up earning himself a lot of playing time, especially earlier in the year. There were a few points when Rask was struggling, and Halak picked up a lot of the starts, but they both had pretty solid years overall. Tuukka Rask finished with a 27-13-5 record, a .912 save percentage, and a 2.48 goals against. Jaro Halak put up a record of 22-11-4, a .922 save percentage, and a 2.34 goals against. So certainly fair to say that Halak outperformed Rask during the regular season, at times at least for sure. Rask certainly had a pretty strong playoff performance though, and was easily the top goaltender in my opinion in the playoffs. Of course, Jordan Binnington of the Blues was pretty solid as well, but I think Rask was the most consistent throughout the entire playoff period. Looking at their top scorers, of course, Brad Marchand continues to set record highs here and break his own personal best. Even though he's getting older, he's getting better as each year goes by. Marchand put up 100 points. He hit the century mark this year and had another phenomenal year for the Bruins. David Pastrnak continued to be a goal scorer for this team, putting up 38 goals and 81 points. Patrice Bergeron continued as well, another player who's aging well and still very productive at 79 points. David Krejci had quite the bounce back year, putting up 73 points. Now, the leading years into this, the last few years, he was on the decline big time, and I was starting to wonder if David Krejci's career might come to an end sooner than we might thought, or the Bruins might find a way to move him off the roster or whatnot, because he just was not performing well and it was on a steady decline. But he really bounced back in a big way this year, tying career highs in points for 73, which he hadn't accomplished since the 08-09 season. So that was a decade ago, which I believe was his second year in the NHL. So David Krejci really was instrumental to this team having so much success this year. And of course, blue liner Torey Krug led the way from the back end with 53 points. I want to take a look as well at any key trades or changes this team made throughout the year. And really, for the most part, through the regular season, there wasn't a whole lot going on. But at the deadline, Don Sweeney made a couple of acquisitions that turned out to be phenomenal deals. He made a trade with the Minnesota Wild, acquiring center iceman Charlie Coyle in exchange for Ryan Donato, as well as some draft picks. And Ryan Donato did do pretty well in Minnesota, but Charlie Coyle was phenomenal in Boston. He was a great pickup. turned out to be a great fit. Obviously, he grew up in the Boston area, grew up a Bruins fan, so I'm sure that was a welcome trade for him, living out a childhood dream, especially considering the playoff run they went on. But Coyle certainly fit quite nicely there, and it was an excellent pickup. Now, of course, they also picked up winger Marcus Johansson from the New Jersey Devils, and he also fit on a line with Coyle relatively well. For the most part, Coyle and Johansson played together quite a bit. Another good move by GM Don Sweeney at the deadline. Now let's jump over and take a look at their salary cap situation and any RFAs or UFAs that need new contracts this summer. Now getting started here with the RFA list, there's only a few, but some pretty important players. Of course, there's forward Danton Heinen, who I'm sure will be given a qualified offer and retained, but the two big ones here are defenseman Charlie McAvoy and Brandon Carlo. Now both these defensemen are proved to be big parts of this team's future. They had a tremendous playoff season and certainly proved to be big parts of the future here. So certainly going to be a big deal to get those guys signed. On the UFA front, there's only a few, and it's certainly debatable who returns. I think that the Bruins are likely, open to some of these guys, or most of these guys returning here, especially Noel Acciari and Marcus Johansson, who, like I said, was acquired at the deadline, but certainly fit in nicely. Of course, Acciari was a big part of that fourth line as well. So it's debatable what they do, but I can certainly see them at least possibly bringing back both of those players. And of course, defenseman Steven Kampfer as well. Filled in on defense. Certainly was not a regular, but filled in when necessary. The veteran defenseman very well could find himself a new home next summer. That would not be a total shock. Overall, for the salary cap situation, the Bruins have 19 NHL contracts for next year for a grand total of $68.69 million, which leaves them $14.3 million in salary cap space, which sounds like a lot, but when you got to lock up 2 or 3 or 4 players, that certainly can be used up quite quickly. Now, they also have a slew of players that are entering their final year of their contracts and would be eligible for contract extensions starting July 1st. Now, some of these guys will get done, but there's probably a lot that we'll have to kind of wait and see and either analyze throughout the season or maybe even next year as their contracts expire. But taking a look at the key players here, the long list of guys that need extensions next year, that list includes newly acquired Charlie Coyle, of course, Nordstrom's on there as well, Chris Wagner, Torey Krug, Zdeno Chara. But no, I'm not too concerned about Chara. He's not going anywhere, and he'll just continue signing one-year deals until he's unable to play anymore. Of course, backup goalie Jaro Halak is entering the final year for his contract. Defenseman Matt Grzelcyk, defenseman Kevin Miller, who missed a lot of time this year, and as well as our pending RFA forward Jake DeBrusk, who's also a big part of their future as well. So they have a lot of guys that need new deals. I don't imagine they'll be too concerned about the RFAs. They very well could wait and be done next summer. But anybody who's a pending UFA, probably wise to make decisions sooner than later about who they'd like to extend and who may not be extended and therefore possibly could be traded either during the season or during the offseason or sometime during the season before the deadline. Now, what does the Boston Bruins need to do to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals next year? Obviously, like I said, they're coming off a devastating Game 7 loss. They were within one win of winning the Stanley Cup. That was the third finals appearance by this core group of guys who obviously won it in 2011, later lost against the Chicago Blackhawks in the final a few years later, and now lost to the St. Louis Blues here yet again in 2019. So this team is certainly capable of being a winner. Overall, they got some hard decisions to make like any team this year, but one of the big things is they need to get McAvoy and Carlo locked up here, and I would try to do long-term deals if possible. Their value to this team has certainly been increasing a lot here over time. They're certainly capable of being top defensemen for this team for a long time. So I think the Bruins need to make sure they obviously not only get them signed, but I would try to lock them up longer term if possible. Probably a wise move from the business side, but we'll see what the players want to do for their contracts as well. But either way, there's two important pieces that need to get looked after. Due to all the contracts expiring after next year, I do think it's quite possible we could see the Bruins make a few trades for some of these guys that are entering the final year. And one player that was talked about before that I could see possibly happening again would be Torey Krug. Now, Torey Krug's a valuable piece to this blue line. He's a great player. He's been great for the Bruins. Ideally, I don't really think they'd want to trade him, but his next contract might prove to be a little bit too rich for what they can handle, and so I can see a possibility of them maybe using him as trade bait this summer to acquire some other future assets and maybe upgrade other areas of their team. But obviously they have some other younger defensemen as well besides Carlo and McAvoy who can step in as well. So I do see Torey Krug as possibly being a trade target. Of course, I did talk about that in our latest NHL Trade rumor video. If you missed that one, I'll link it up here in the YouTube cards. But he is somebody who's being mentioned in the rumor mill now that the Bruins are done as potential trade bait for the Bruins this summer. Of course, they could look to shed some more salary here with forward David Backes, who they signed to a fairly long-term deal, but it's not working out. He still has a couple years left on that contract. The only downfall here, and I'll put up the buyout calculator on the screen so you can see, but as you can see here in year one, they're only going to save $333,000, so not a lot of savings right off the bat. But in year two, for the year after, they'd save $3.66 million. So that could come in very handy for extra salary cap space when they need to have all those other contracts that are going to be coming due. And of course, for the 2 years after that, they would have an additional cap hit of $666,000, which is a little bit easier to absorb, especially with some increases to the cap here over time. So I can see a possibility here as the buyout window starts to open that David Backes might be a player that ends up looking for a new home, becomes an unrestricted free agent through that process. Not a given that it happens, but I do think there is a decent possibility they at least consider it. Big question General Manager Don Sweeney needs to ask and determine how to react to is, can this core group make another run to the finals? As we saw this year, they played with a lot of injuries, which of course happens in this great sport. Zdeno Chara had a broken jaw. Patrice Bergeron was certainly battling, I believe, to be a groin injury. You could tell he wasn't 100%, but they really weren't saying what was wrong. So those two guys are very, very important to them, and obviously we're bothered by injuries, so they weren't 100%. So that certainly had an impact on things as well. You still got Marchand and Pasternak and David Krejci. They're not, outside of Pasternak, they're all kind of starting to age a little bit here, but they still have some younger players that are becoming key contributors as well. I really don't see the Boston Bruins looking to really break up their core guys at all, make any trades. They need to determine if they feel like they're capable of another run and what kind of players they need to surround them with here in order to keep this team so competitive and have another shot at winning again next year. In all honesty, a team like the Bruins with guys like Chara and Bergeron and Marchand, they're certainly really, really tough to bet against. They know how to win. They've been there time and time again, and you can never count them out. If they're on the ice, there's always a possibility they're going to come back. And I know even late in the Game 7, as things looked out of reach, you could not take it for granted that the Blues were going to win until that final horn went and it was over. So if you're General Manager Don Sweeney, what moves do you make this offseason to try to get this Boston Bruins team to once again win the Eastern Conference and have a shot at next year's Stanley Cup? If you're new to the channel, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, subscribe for more content just like this. The remaining videos in this series will be coming here over the next few days. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.